Hi everyone, and welcome to the Research for Social Impact podcast presented by the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne University of Technology. My name is Susan Pizzati and I'm the Principal Industry Fellow in Social Impact here at CSI Swinburne, and I'm delighted to be your host for this series. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are producing this podcast today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. For those of you who may not be familiar with CSI Swinburne, we are a highly industry-engaged, practice-oriented research and teaching centre based in Swinburne School of Business, Law and Entrepreneurship. We are one of 4 university-based nodes of the highly respected CSI National Network, which also includes the University of New South Wales, Flinders University and the University of Western Australia. Throughout this series, we'll be bringing you conversations, interviews and information from our researchers, sector experts, industry partners and even our students and alumni, aligned with our core areas of work, which include social entrepreneurship, social finance and investment, measuring and communicating social impact, community services innovation, and employment service system reform for marginalised groups. Our discussion today explores some recent research into innovative supported employment pathways for marginalised groups of people. Joining us for today's discussion is Dr. Perri Campbell, who is a research fellow here at CSI Swinburne and a highly valued member of our team since 2018. In her career to date, Perri has held a number of prestigious research roles both here in Australia and overseas, including as a visiting scholar at the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues at the University of California, Berkeley. Perri is a youth and gender studies scholar with extensive experience working with social enterprise, both here in Australia and in North America, particularly in the areas of program development and organisational change. Perri has published widely about health equity and wellbeing implications of social enterprise for young people, and her current work, which we'll be discussing today, explores innovative models of supported employment pathways for people with experiences of marginalisation, including people with a disability and young people. Hi, Perri. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks for that lovely introduction as well.
You're very welcome. So to get our conversation started today, I'd really love to know where your interest in this research lies. How did you become involved in your work around supported employment pathways?
Yeah, so my work started off in social enterprises, looking at how young people's transitions into work can be supported. I did some work in Australia and also in the US, looking at the way that social enterprises create a community that's driven by sort of hope and action for positive change. So that really motivated me to see the way that social goals were being made concrete by the enterprises and were also aligned with individuals' dreams who were coming into the social enterprises and participating there. I've worked with a few social enterprises to understand their approaches in offering support, training, employment opportunities. And during one of the projects that I was involved in, we developed a model to capture this. And that was called the Work Integration Social Enterprise Model, or the WISE model, to use the acronym there. And the wonderful Jo Barrackett was leading that project. Jo's really well known, of course, in the social enterprise space. So it was a real pleasure to work with her. The model was really scaffolding for the WISEability model because it outlines the best practice organizational design for social enterprises. So, at that stage, working with Jo, we had the outline for the model and have then worked to build upon it in subsequent years. So that brings us up to where we are currently with the model and adapting that for the disability space. The impetus for that was Jenny Crosby, who saw me doing a presentation on the WISE model and said that we could really use something like this in the disability sector. Jenny's now a CSI industry fellow and has a huge amount of knowledge, as you know, and experience working with disability enterprises. So we worked on developing that together. And then in 2021, we were lucky enough to receive funding from the Information Linkages and Capacity Building Scheme run by the Department of Social Services. And we got to work adapting the WISE model with Gen U.
Wow, what a journey. That's fantastic. And before we dive into it in a more detail later in the discussion, in sort of broad terms, can you describe what the WISEability model is for us?
Yeah, it's an organisational design model that can be used by disability enterprises to support people with a disability into employment pathways.
Hmm.
The work integration social enterprise ability model highlights the key ingredients necessary for disability enterprises to support open employment. And the benefit of the model is that it builds on organisational strengths that are already present in disability-focused organisations, like a
Hmm.
strong culture of respect and support, or a structure that includes flexibility and variation for work roles. So
Yeah, great.
organisations can pick and choose from the model as they see fit.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really helpful background. Thanks, Perry. And for those of our listeners who might not be so familiar with the issues around supported employment for people with experiences of marginalisation, can you give us some background? So why is this research so important?
Yeah, so I think the key to that is to understanding a bit of the history around disability employment and the
Hmm.
challenges and opportunities that people with a disability have had in working. So although people with a disability have worked in different jobs, they're often marginalised from the mainstream labour market. And this is due in part to a history of segregating people with a disability into separate work settings
Hmm.
since around the 1950s in Australia when sheltered workshops were established.
Hmm.
And this continued in the 1970s with the funding of work preparation centres to provide things like vocational training for school leavers with intellectual disability. Over time, more advanced separate work settings have emerged, and these are now called disability enterprises. So there's been a lot of debate surrounding disability enterprises, especially after the Disability Royal Commission, where people reported continuing segregation and low pay.
Hmm.
However, some disability enterprises provide important services, including work experience, on-the-job training and employment, and important social connections as well. So what we're actually finding that in some cases, there's a strong culture of care and respect. And this is not always the case in the open labour market.
Mm.
It's estimated that there's around 16,000 people with a disability working in disability enterprises. And this is an important employment outcome for a lot of people to work in the disability enterprise. But for other people, working in community facing jobs is also equally important and having access to those jobs.
Hmm.
So I guess the point at which we enter the debate is to provide a mechanism for people to transition from the disability enterprises, as they're called, out into the open labour market to work.
Hmm.
And this is one of the purposes of the Wiseability model. So the model aligns with the goals of many disability enterprises who are in the process of currently re-envisioning themselves as work integration social enterprises. So there's often a lot of language changes and naming changes that we have to keep up with. So
Hmm.
it's essential to recognize that employment here isn't merely a means to an income, it's a fundamental human right.
Mm.
You know, it's something that lifts people out of poverty, enables self-sufficiency, and enables dignity and personal growth. And for many people with a disability, it's part of an ordinary life lived in the community.
Mm. Yeah, so right. A job is not just a job, is it? Is it so much about, how you perceive yourself and your purpose and where you place yourself in a community. So really, really important
Mm.
considerations there.
Mm.
And what was involved in actually developing the model? What was the process you went through?
Yeah, so it's been a really great process over the last couple of years. We started developing the model with Gen U, who are a large disability organisation operating in the Geelong region in Melbourne. And the model, as I said, built up upon the original WISE model design. And we started with seven areas of organisational design. So structure, culture, space and environment, industry relationships, finance and policy and process.
Hmm.
We worked with a number of different stakeholders and took an action learning approach to building up the model, which means we were continuously feeding back information in to build that model with staff members, people with a disability working in disability enterprises, employers, and other stakeholders. So that feedback was incredibly useful for understanding the pressure points in the organisation and the aims and goals of the organisation and people with a disability in terms of their employment pathways, alongside the challenges that they encountered as well in carving out those pathways. Yeah, so with Gen U, we were able to add the pathways to employment element into the model. And this sort of shifts the practice to support participants to gain employment outside the disability enterprise. So it was about sort of making that step outside the disability enterprise, which some do, but not all organisations do that or have the inherent capacity to do that because of the original design of disability enterprises. And so then it brings us up to recent years where we started working with 3 additional organisations to test and refine the model. So we've got Windaring, who've been great, Disability Trust and Ability Works, who've all been excellent partners doing different things at their work sites. So we wanted to capture this and also keep working on the challenges to the employment pathway for individuals and how we can address them. And now we've kept expanding our scope and working with 10 organisations and potentially more to implement that model where people feel that it's right for them. So we've got some great partners there, including Jigsaw, Civic, Blue Line and Mobo Group. So we're very excited about the work we're currently doing with them to understand where the model fits for them.
Amazing. What an incredible expansion over a short period of time. Were there particular challenges that you've experienced along the way in developing the model?
Yeah, there were a few challenges. We had great support from disability enterprises from the beginning, which was important in mitigating any of the challenges that we were going to face in building this model. Gen U were really invested in building the model with us. Jamie Lee Demmer and the Duro Street team devoted so much time and energy alongside their employees who provided feedback on the model as we were developing it. The other organisations that have come on board have been equally fantastic despite the time pressures that people face, because this is on top of people's everyday jobs.
Of course.
These sort of discussions with us about the model. So as we've developed it, we've asked organisations to tell us, how does the pathway into employment work best? How's it funded? What sort of time investment does it require for them? So things that have come up there as challenges has been pairing the support with NDIS funding, staff resourcing, and also opportunities, finding the right employer, finding that match.
Yeah. And what about the challenges for the WISEs themselves in actually implementing it?
Part of the challenge there is getting the funding right in implementing it. So the model, that pathway to open employment can be supported by core funding and capacity building funding. But that funding is not always in everyone's NDIS plan in the way that it needs to be to support movement in open employment. So that's one of the things that then involves technicalities like going back, getting plan reviews, getting the right funding in there, and that can hold people up and interrupt their momentum and can take time, which is a major hurdle. So I guess the other sort of tension disability enterprises face is that classic social enterprise tension where you've got your dual goals for a business that wants to be profitable balanced against social goals. So if disability enterprises are training employees until they become productive and highly skilled, and then supporting those people into open employment, they're losing productive and skilled staff members, which ultimately affects their bottom line. But that's not unique to disability enterprises, or should I say work integration social enterprises. The challenges that they face are particularly around the funding, the NDIS funding, which, you know, as I mentioned, can make or break a person's work journey, and the labour market context that the model and the disability enterprises sit in. So there's just a sense of employers needing more support there to provide the knowledge around appropriate working environments for people with disability.
And so what are the main things that you've learned along the way? Can you talk us through some of the key findings so far?
Working with our partners over the past couple of years, we've found that the pathway to employment differs for different individuals. So while some people benefit from intensive and sustained supports, other people benefit from decreasing supports on the job and building independence. And these forms of work can be supported by disability enterprises with hybrid and open employment options. So different forms of support benefit from working in different areas, which the disability enterprise can provide a higher level of support where it's needed and then taper that off in open employment settings. We've also found that employer investment, work environment, and pace are important factors in determining the sustainability of the employment position and the well-being of the employee. So an employer who's invested in the work journey and everyday experience of an employee helps contribute to a supportive and enjoyable working life. One of the other key findings is that most disability enterprises are spending a significant amount of time in the early phase of the employment pathway, including discovery, assessment, and paperwork for participants in the first place. So setting up the pathway is quite time-consuming and labour-intensive. And this is the case whether WISE were following a customised employment model or it was their own employment pathway and work experience model. We also found that there's a large variation across partners in the cost of an employment pathway due to the different level of supports. So there might be more intensive supports involved or less intensive supports involved. And the cost for an employment pathway sat between $10,000 and $20,000 per year. And that's not always reflected in people's NDIS plans. So employment's a highly variable activity for people with a disability transitioning from disability enterprises into mainstream employment. And for this reason, there needs to be different treatment of the employment-related funding in NDIS plans. There could be, for instance, some contingency funding built in, or there could be options for it to be varied more easily with minimal approval through a specific process or function within the NDIS. And finally, just those protracted transitions that I mentioned were a challenge. So when participants were held up in their jobs, this had a negative impact on their mental health as they lost momentum on their employment journey and felt held up. So that's something that can really be worked on there.
Yeah, interesting. Gee, it sounds like you've uncovered a lot of really useful information already for those working to address these issues. From what I understand, one of the main challenges in creating mainstream employment opportunities is around employer readiness and capability, and you've already touched on some of that a little bit already in our discussion. But based on your research, are there things that you would like potential employers to know?
Yeah, definitely. We know that there are significant benefits to workplaces when employers include people from diverse groups. So we definitely want them to know the benefits of employing someone with a disability. And this is evidenced in the research as well. Employers reported an improved workplace culture and a sense of happiness in the workspace where people with a disability were included. And people with a disability discussed with us that they were learning new skills and also bringing skills to the employers. And also many of our participants were keen to see more of these work options in their communities. So there is that keenness from people to want to work in community-facing jobs. The main sort of challenge here, and somewhere that employers can be supported, is the area of confidence and knowledge. So it's important for employers to know that disability enterprises are prepared and ready to help set up the employment pathway. And this can be pretty straightforward. It might mean that individuals work for a few hours or on a few days a week as they settle into the role, or it could mean that they have someone come with them to help them learn new tasks as they settle in, and the disability or disability services can help guide this. So they have training books and guidelines and tools that can also help on the job. So it's just about that knowledge sharing piece to create the inclusive employment opportunities. And as the WISE staff say to us, the biggest challenge is probably just finding businesses that are ready and open for this, or ready to try it if they haven't, and finding the right fit there that works for everyone, working in necessary jobs, working in meaningful jobs, and seeing that this is work that everyone should be offered and that everyone can do.
And the benefits, as you say, are huge for everybody involved.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. And what about for people who are looking for work? What are the key messages from your research that you'd like them to be aware of?
Yep, sure. So the WISE are there to help with that transition, as are the disability employment services. There's a lot of changes happening that mean that WISE want to offer more work and more work options to people in different industries. The customized approach is a great way of deciding on what work you want to do and what you would like your working life to look like. So people might like to work in a disability enterprise, they might like to work in open employment, or they might like to start their own micro business and be their own boss. So these are all various options that we describe these options on our website, where people can have a look at the model, which has got an overview of the employment pathways with some written materials there and some videos as well that have been filmed with disability enterprises like GenU. But really, we'd welcome any engagement and feedback on what we've developed so far. We don't have all the answers, but there are some things that we know that do support employment pathways. So I'd really encourage individuals with disabilities, families, employers, and disability enterprises to pick up parts of the model that might be useful to them.
Fantastic. And the model was recently shortlisted for a Zero Project Award in Geneva, which is very exciting. And so for those of you who don't know about the Zero Project, it's a global research-driven initiative aimed at supporting the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So each year, the organisation conducts research into innovations around the world, and just 70 innovative solutions are shortlisted. So as one of those projects this year, your work is obviously having a huge impact, Perri. What sort of difference have you seen the model make so far?
Well, I think it's given people the opportunity to create change in their roles at disability enterprises, no matter what their role is, whether that's making spaces more accessible or opening up conversations with supported employees about their career goals, which is, really important small changes that can happen in organizations. And there's also the recognition that open employment can be challenging, and not everyone has a great experience in open employment. And this means that we get to talk about how to make it better and more of an everyday option for people. So it's really opened up a lot of those conversations. Through the model, I think people with a disability have been supported to identify their work options. So one person told us that his work offered more than financial rewards. And he said that the pride motivates me, and receiving good feedback from the people who are working for me and with me also motivates me. And many of these employees hadn't had this same experience before in identifying the benefits that have come from their roles. So participating organisations and staff have said that the implementation process has changed their attitudes towards the role of disability enterprises. So they now see the bridging work that they can do with employees and with employers out in the open labour market. In addition, I think the research to inform the model has been great because it's been able to influence policy. The models formed part of submissions to public inquiries, including the Disability Royal Commission and the review of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The model's been endorsed by the NDS and is now being taken up widely by organisations who've successfully sought funding to adopt it, and in part have been successful with the structural adjustment fund, for instance. So that's really exciting. So we're slowly working towards change together.
That's all sounding amazing.
Great.
And the start of, an incredible opportunity, I think, for us to really better understand this space and, as you said, to be working really collaboratively towards better outcomes. So really exciting stuff. My final question to you today, Perri, is something that I ask all of our guests, and I'd love to know, if you had an unlimited budget to put towards a new piece of research or education in this space, what would you spend it on?
Yeah, well, there'd be quite a few things on that list.
I bet.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I've been reflecting on lately is the higher rate of marginalisation from the workforce that women and young people with a disability encounter. So we'll be looking towards that to work on their inclusion and addressing the particular challenges that they face and that employers face as well. I think it's really important to address it from both ends as well. So the access to work, opening that conversation up with employers and creating a best practice model with employers who are in the open labour market. If we've got this WISE model that supports disability enterprises, can we have an adapted version for employers? Yes, we can, I think. So I'd like to also, I would get into the education and training aspects of the pathway and credentials for these. I think that needs to be expanded and made more accessible. Controversially, I'd like to see an alternative to the supported wage system. I think that this needs to have a bit of a revision. And yeah, just as I said, I think the bridging and education programs for employers so that they feel confident to make that space in their organisations for people with a disability would be fantastic.
Amazing, all incredible ideas there that I'm sure we will be coming back to you at some point over the next little while and getting updates on your work as it progresses. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, Perri. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners will really want to explore your research in some more detail after listening to this episode, and we'll obviously be putting all the links to the research we've discussed today in the show notes. But if people would like to contact you directly for more information, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yep, I am on LinkedIn, so I'm happy for people to connect with me there. And we also have the website for the Wiseability model, and that is wiseabilitymodelaustralia.org.au.
Fantastic. We'll put all those details up in the show notes. Thanks again so much, Perri. That brings us to the end of another episode. I really hope you enjoyed our discussion. And as always, please feel free to contact us if you have any follow-up questions or feedback on this episode. We always love hearing from you. Thanks for listening, and we hope you can join us again really soon.